Welcome to our second Spring Women's Leadership Forum titled Teen Girls Experiencing Increased Sadness and Violence, a discussion with Utah experts. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and I'm also the Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, and I'm the host, and I'll also be the panel moderator today. Now, this event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents first by producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And then third, convening trainings and events like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And so I want to start by thanking our sponsors, the Utah Education Network, UEN, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and USU Extension for making this event possible. Now, before I introduce our panelists, I want to just give that little background that you may have read when you signed up for this webinar today. But according to a recently released Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC report, nearly 3 in 5, 57% of U.S. teen girls felt persistently sad or hopeless in 2021, double that of boys, representing a nearly 60% increase and the highest level reported over the last decade. And it is also, the report discusses findings that teen girls are experiencing record high levels of violence, sadness, and suicide risks. And LGBTQ youth are at high risk as well. So Dr. Christy Kane, who I'll introduce in just a second, and I put together this panel to discuss some of these concerning findings as they relate to girls and young women in the United States, but we want to focus really on the state of Utah with some of our discussion today. And we also want to not just discuss the findings, but to share some practical solutions on how parents and educators and religious leaders and other influencers can strengthen girls and young women today. So let's start by introducing the panelists. Christy Kane, Dr. Christy Kane. I'll introduce you first. And again, Christy, thanks so much for helping put together this panel today. So Christy Kane is a licensed clinical mental health counselor with a doctorate in clinical psychology, and she's also a sought-after speaker. Educators, parents, and business leaders discover solutions from her workshops and numerous conferences, including TEDx Park City National Association of School Resource Officers Conference, NPR Radio National Mental Health Conferences, Fox News National Radio Programs, Parents' Nights, as well as her radio segments. So thank you for joining us, Christy. And I think before I introduce Gina next, I'm going to actually ask you the first question, and then I'll introduce the next and ask them that same question. So my first question to you, Christy, is why are you interested and so passionate about the topic of mental health, specifically in this discussion of girls and young women? So I'll throw it to you for a minute, and then we'll continue with the introductions.
I started speaking about, 10 years ago on the neurological impact of electronics to the brain, because we started seeing significant changes in the young people's lives. And ever since then, it's just been a mission to help stabilize the mental health of young people, in particular, young girls. The rates and the statistics that we're seeing now are horrific. And so my interest is in the hopes that we find and work together to change these statistics. We need to help young women feel positive and empowered in their life today, and that's not what we're seeing.
Thank you so much. So I'll shift now to Dr. Gina Hales, and she is a licensed clinical social worker with a focus on youth, children, and their families. And she currently serves on the Provo City School Board, where she sits on the legislative and policy committees, in addition to several other assignments working with teachers and students, families. And Gina has a passion for working with individuals and communities who have traditionally been underrepresented and underserved. And Gina attended BYU, where she earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in social work, and then a PhD in educational leadership and foundations as well. So I'll ask you, Gina, that first question. Why are you interested and passionate about the topic of mental health for girls and women?
I've spent my career working mainly with, as it said, mainly with youth and their families. And I really feel like that's where we can make a lot of good change, is their brains are still forming and they're still malleable, and we can still really help them get on the right track. For girls in particular, I think, especially after seeing these numbers, we have a crisis that's brewing and happening. And so I think that we need to pay specific attention to our girls. And also in my community, at this point, women and girls tend to be the primary caregivers for the children. And if we can help our primary caregivers for children be healthy and be happy, and then model that for their children, I feel like that's preventative, right? It's good for them. It's good for us as women, but it's also preventative for future generations, since a lot of us, I'm the primary caregiver in my home, and hopefully I'm passing on some good mental health habits. So I feel like if we can intervene here, perhaps we can help these girls, but also help future generations.
Thank you so much, Gina. And then next, Dr. Jenet Jacob Erickson is an associate professor in religious education at BYU, and she received a PhD in family social science from the University of Minnesota after completing a bachelor's degree in nursing and a master's degree in linguistics. And she's a research fellow at both the Wheatley Institute and the Institute for Family Studies, and has been a columnist on family issues for the Deseret News for the last decade. So welcome to you, and I'll ask you that same question.
So good to be here, Susan, and thank you for all the good work you do, and wonderful to be with these other panelists. I, along with Christy and Gina, you can't hear those numbers, and I know Tanei feels the same way. You cannot hear that and not feel like an urgency, a deep urgency. I'll never forget hearing a statement that women are the mortar that holds the bricks of civilization together. And there's just no question that women play a fundamental role in the well-being of society. And so I think, thinking of myself as a woman, having gone through adolescent development, the unique needs of women and girls, how we navigate that in becoming such a central force for good in the well-being of children and communities and nations, then I think you can't help but say something is missing. Something very significant is missing and is complicating this really central developmental process. And we have got to figure it out and have got to start helping, because when the mortar falls apart, the entire civilization falls apart. And we need our women to be all that they're designed to be, our girls and women.
I love that. Thank you so much. And today, Tanei, I'm sorry to leave you to the end here. Tanei Atagi Henry began as a high school English teacher, and she stopped teaching once she had her second daughter. And in 2017, she founded Provo Girls Summit. And you and I, as you know, have stayed in touch about that summit, and what a great summit it has been through the years. It's a career exploration event for girls ages 8 through 12. And she's committed to showing girls that they have options available to them in every professional field. And so I'll ask you that same question. Why is the mental health of girls and young women so important to you?
Yeah, I think obviously, as a woman myself, I've been very influenced by my own mom, my grandmothers, and generations before me. And then now as an adult, my sisters and friends, we are all entrusted with, just as Jeanette and Gina talked about, we are all entrusted with a lot of emotional and logistical weight in our society. And in order to make sure that that goes well, these mental and emotional habits need to be formed at a younger age. And so for me, just once I reached middle age, I realized, all of these questions and issues that we're dealing with as middle-aged women, we could have had answers earlier. We could have had a lot of just more information given to us earlier. And so that's what I think. And so building girls and young women today helps the future generations. So
thank you so much. And I love that you spend your energy with this summit on 8 to 12-year-olds. And I think you are all have more expertise than I in this area, but from the research I've read, more and more the mental health challenges are going to younger ages. And so let's go ahead and jump in now to some of the questions. So as you read the new CDC report, and again, it came out just a couple of months ago, but the data, just a reminder to people, it is from 2021. So as we're researchers, and we know sometimes that data lags, but what we know as well is the Utah data. So the national data just came out, but the Utah data and the state-by-state data won't be out for another month or two, hopefully sooner than later. And I did last month actually look at the 2019 and compare Utah to the nation. And so we know there's sometimes some differences. And so what I'd like you to, we'll dig into some specifics, but as you read, each of you, as you just read generally that report and looked at the specific data, what was maybe one or two things that really stuck out to you as the biggest concerns that you're seeing? And Christy, I'll go back to you. I'm going with informal names today, not all the doctors. We're just going with first names today. So Christy, what was one or two things that really to you, based on your background, were the most concerning?
I took the opportunity to read some of the editorial comments of Kathleen, who was behind this research, after I saw the startling statistics. And I think the strongest thing I came away with is there's not one specific problem leading to the statistics, but there's a foundational disconnect of human connection. And so we're seeing that manifested in the substance abuse issues that were brought out in that report, the depression, the hopelessness, but there's underlying feeling of young women today that they don't feel like they're connecting, whether it's to their parents, whether it's to other teens, whether it's even to themselves. And so to me, that was a powerful aha of why aren't they, and what have we shifted in our society that's taking away that foundational connected feeling?
Yeah. And that's such a good point, and maybe we'll get into it later. But of course, I always come back to how did the pandemic, shift us as well. And 2021, that data is right during the core of it. Thank you, Gina. I'll move over to you. What were some of the, one or two of the big ahas for you?
I saw, as I was looking at the trends in the data, I noticed that there were several trends that were kind of down. A lot of were trending down, but as soon as we got to the mental health data, it was either up or one that stayed steady. And that really stood out to me because I think they're all interrelated, right? If you increase substance use and substance abuse, then we're going to infect mental health and other things as well. But I really think that mental health is kind of the bedrock, right? If you can have good mental health, then maybe you can deal with some of these other things. But if you don't have good mental health, then a lot of these other factors are automatically going to slide. They're automatically going to go. And so one of my thoughts was, I'm not sure how they've happened to do better trends. The trend is better or hasn't moved when the mental health seems to have gone down. And I'm a little worried if we don't address this, it's all going to go downhill. And so we need to really address this and figure it out. And we need to be looking at research specific for the specific populations who are being most negatively impacted, which is our girls right now. And we don't have a lot of research out there, whether it's brain, biological, social. A lot of it is not directed at girls and women. And we need to rectify that, which you are doing. I think you're doing a good job of that.
Well, it's so true. I mean, there's so much data, and in Utah, we're not as far ahead as many other states in terms of measuring gender. We still gather data and just assume it's all the same. But I'll tell you, I'm learning so much. Of course, I've known gender for a long time, but I'm learning a lot about race and ethnicity, and that we just have to collect that data. Thank you. Gina. Jeanette, I'll go over to you.
Yeah, I think to those points, I appreciate Christy mentioning connectedness. It seems so obvious that there's a disconnect with others and as she noted, with oneself. I was so struck by this sense that many do not want to be alive, don't want to be here, don't want to be in their bodies. There's a sense, right, of the profound increase in gender dysphoria among girls internationally. There's a sense of, I don't want to be embodied as a woman. Also, the increase, I think, in suicide just profoundly indicates there's a sense of, I don't want to be here living. And that's just very painful. That in connection with the sexual violence, I think that I know we're going to address, Susan, but that is just to think at a time post Me Too, when we have presumably worked hard on consent and all of that, there is clearly a missing link, a significant issue to address in terms of women's experiencing sexual violence, being forced, experiencing unwanted sexual advances. So there's a really broken culture around sexuality, I think, that's showing up and increasing that sense of powerlessness and not an ability to act, and to act with a sense of hope and meaning and purpose. So all of that seemed to coalesce in these findings.
Thank you. This is going to be a somber conversation today. And when we knew that, and all of you joining knew that from the title, but can I just say that through the years, I'm getting teary-eyed already, especially in the state of Utah, we've just been silent on many of these issues. And I do a lot of work around domestic violence and child sexual abuse and sexual assault. And it's just, those days are gone. We cannot be silent about any of those. Tanei, what are
Yes,
your
so my
thoughts?
biggest concern, the thing that popped out to me was the sexual violence, because, and that's exactly what you said, Susan, is that we just aren't seeing the work I'm not seeing in Utah the work necessary to make that stop happening and to make reporting better and make keeping the victim safe continuously as a priority. And so that is what bothers me. That's what bothered me the most.
Yeah, and you're not seeing, I like how you said that, you're not seeing the work. I mean, we're
Right.
not taking it seriously enough. We're not doing specific things that can help.
Right.
Or if we are, people aren't seeing it, or there's not enough. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's dig down into some of the specifics now. As you know, and this is a quote from the report, 3 in 5 girls felt persistently sad and hopeless, a marker for depressive symptoms in 2021. And that was a substantial increase in the decade before. So do you think that this plays out in similar ways in Utah, and why? Let's start with Gina on this one, and we may not have time for all of the questions to have everyone, but let's I think this one's a real core one to start with.
So this is totally unscientific, but in the last couple of years, I always get people asking me for referrals for therapists for their children. But the number of people asking me for referrals for their daughters has, 10 times, like it has gotten, it's a lot more. And then trying to find a therapist that is available, that could work with their daughters is even harder. And the really good ones are full. They're full for 6 months to a year. And so while it's not very scientific, I do think it's I think it's a sign, right? This is happening in Utah. It may be happening at different rates, and it may be happening maybe a little differently than it does in other areas, but I think it is definitely, it's definitely a concern. And I know that I haven't done much mental health work in other states, but I do know that here, we do have a culture that we want to be the best we can be. And I think that is fantastic, but it kind of strays into the perfectionist area. Like, we need to be perfect, and we quote scriptures about being perfect. And I think that that's a good thing to strive for. But I do think that our young women tend to take a lot onto themselves and believe that they can't make any mistakes. And so I think that that's something that is, I don't think it's specific to Utah, but I do believe that we do have a lot of concerns here in Utah that we need to take care of and look at.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because one of the metrics that Wallet Hub uses to look at best and worst states for women specifically is depressive, around depression. And just recently, one of the metrics that they shared was that Utah's, so I'm not even talking about teen girls, I'm talking about women right now, but we were 49th out of 51. So one of the most depressed states. So there's got to be an impact or a connection there a bit. Jeanette?
Yes, I'm sure, Utah tends to just follow trends that are going on. I think you've noted some challenges with mental health. I know sometimes that's difficult because the metrics are different across states, but there's no question that just the culture in which we're all growing up, the culture in which girls are growing up is challenging for them developmentally, regardless of where they live. We know that the Intermountain states tend to have higher suicidality. There seems to be, right, like hypotheses about why that is, but I think there's something going on apart from just where we live that's shaping that. So I think we just got to address these issues, Susan, for girls. And if we looked at, it's interesting to think of a culture. We just tackled the cultural elements. We've got the social media piece, which I just heard someone very powerfully describe. It's like having a consciousness always present with you that is not your own consciousness. And what that means to a developing girl who's trying to establish a sense of identity in herself in relation to the oneness that she has within herself and integrity with herself in a culture where she can never be free of that outside consciousness. And appreciating that women, I just read another piece that was fascinating about the influx of oxytocin that happens in a girl during puberty. It's just a massive amount. Christy can talk about this a lot. But what's different from boys, as we've tried to unpack over decades, why are women much more susceptible to certain forms of mental illness, like depression and anxiety? Some data suggest that did not dramatically differ until the 1970s. Now we're measuring things differently, but there was a pretty significant shift in how we went about sexuality and women and the sexualization of women from that period of time on. But interesting to think about that flood of oxytocin for her that a young man's also experiencing, but with it comes in her a need for connection. So there's sexual development and it's within the context of relationship. And so where girls are inclined during that period to pursue relationships, to spend time with people, boys can withdraw in that, right? You've got a different hormonal pattern going on. And to think of how much rupturing is going on in the current culture around sexuality, around just identity development in a social media world, then those natural developmental processes that depend on healthy connection, stable connection that's not harmful sexually, we're disrupting that natural developmental process in the culture that we live in. And that would affect Utahns as well as everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Jeanette, I was going to just add to your chemical notice of the brain. We also know on research at that same time frame, the boys develop empathy factor much later. Yeah. And so when you see that oxytocin play for the girls, but the decreased empathy for the boys, and then the total incestuous pornography viewing that's going on for young men, that we can see part of that violence towards women just because of that developmental process and that pornography influence. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on this question, Christy, before I go over to Tanei? No? Okay, you're good. So let me shift us over. Let's stop right there and just go to, like, we talked about these depressive symptoms. So let's go to a solution question. So what are some things on that topic specifically? And of course, they all blend in, all of these issues blend in, but what are some thoughts right now from each of you in terms of, excuse me, in terms of some solutions for parents? We talk about them specifically, for educators and maybe some other populations. Yeah, who would like to jump in? I'll just take whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll go first. This is
great.
This is my favorite question because I feel like this is where the hope comes in, right? We're starting to talk about what can I do right now? And so I think that girls need models. They need models of emotionally healthy behavior. And that means to what Gina was talking about, like to the point where women are standing up for themselves, being aware of what they can and can't handle and speaking up in those regards. And I really think that even like going as far as like role playing uncomfortable situations and saying, that's not something I'm going to do right now. Thank you so much for your input. And then also, as far as the social media aspect goes, they need to see moms, aunts, friends' moms putting down their phones. They need to see all of us as adults. And I don't think we can underestimate, to the point of human connection, the importance of intergenerational contact, right? These girls need to see middle-aged women, grandparents, like all of us need to come together and sort of rally around these girls so that they can see us at all stages of life being emotionally healthy and unhealthy, and then working through it.
That's true. That's true. And Gina, I see you nodding a lot on that one. So do you have any other thoughts?
I just agree with everything she just said. That everything she said is on my list. Like, this is my longest list of all. I was answering all the questions and I'm like, oh, this is my longest list, because I want people to leave with hope, right?
Yeah.
So modeling good behaviors, modeling healthy, mental health, and saying no to things and saying yes to things, and then falling apart and showing them that you can put yourself back together. I think those are all really good. What I would add to that is, and Tanei kind of talked about it, but they need role models, right? And they need role models like me. I have 2 daughters. They need role models that are like me, but they also need role models who aren't me, who have different beliefs than I do, who, like, for example, we have a friend of the family who came and took the girls out who's a different religion than us. She knows what our values are, but it's so important that my daughter have somebody else, because there may come a time when my daughter doesn't want to talk to me because she's scared of me, because I'm scary. People tell me I'm scary and I get it. And so I have a list, not an actual list, but I have a list in my head of people that they can. So if my daughter who's 9 looks like she doesn't want to talk to me, I say, who would you like to talk to? You don't have to talk to me. We need to have resources for them who are like us and also who are unlike us, because they may connect better to them, and that is okay. I think sometimes as parents, we get a little territorial, like my daughter should always speak to me and I should be the first person. And ideally that's correct. But I want my daughter to have resources and access to all kinds of people, not just people like me. And the other thing I just want to say here is we have to be able to listen and suspend judgment, right? When our kids come to us and they tell us things that are hard, one of the first things I tell parents is you have to kind of like, I know inside that you're jumping up and down, but you have to stand back and you have to lovingly respond, because if you freak out, they're not going to tell you anything anymore. And if you judge them, and not just them, but if you judge their friends, if you say your friends are horrible, because you can't do that. You need to be able to point out things that are happening with their friends, and you need to be able to point out all these other things. But if you tell them that their friends are horrible, they're going to stop talking to you. And it's the last thing that needs to happen, is for them to stop talking to you.
I think it's, Dr. Madsen, I would add to that accurate information. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about mental health, and kids are running around based on internet information, self-diagnosing, diagnosing each other. And so I think it's really important that parents have frank, honest, factual conversations with their young women about mental health. What is depression? What is anxiety? What is bipolar? What kind of help is out there? Because I deal with so much misdiagnosis and misunderstanding all the time. And these young people are so smart. I mean, compared to where I was, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And they want to know the truth. Like, they don't want it watered down. They want the right information. And we need to get better at giving that to them.
And we need to, as parents, I was thinking when you said, there's all kinds of information out there, but often parents don't look at the real good information too. So obviously we need to do that as well. Jeanette, did you?
Yeah,
Right.
I love these wise insights from all of them. It's powerful. I was thinking there's a really striking quote from Andy Crouch, who writes a lot about the technological world. Obviously, that's a huge piece. It's like education around mental health. It's addressing the social media side. It's addressing the sexuality side. And I think to Tanei's comment of women understanding themselves and their ability to say no, understanding that sexuality is their own. And I think we talk to girls, right, about being desirable, and men and boys about desiring. And she grows up with this sense of what my role is just to accommodate the desires of men. And part of her feels ambivalence about it because it's wonderful to be desired, but not a clear sense of what I want, what I choose is the most important thing, and being integrous with that. And we just, in a world where women are ubiquitously sexualized, I was thinking they grow up with such a misunderstanding about the role of sexuality, what they get a sense that looking sexual is powerful, that everything about me is defined by my sexual appeal. And we've just got to tackle that. That's 2006 is when the APA came out with that massive report about the sexualization of girls and how profoundly devastating it is on mental health and physical health and emotional health. But that was prior to social media. That was prior to them. And so they are literally surrounded with distorted ways of packaging women for consumption sexually. And we have just got to reclaim, and I think that requires a whole lot of talking. It's recognizing that pornography is, I think Peggy Orenstein just unpacking that in the New York Times, that actually pornography is the great sex educator for boys. What are they going to pick up from that? Well, all of her quotes from young men that she's interviewing, right, is that they have no sense of what's appropriate in terms of how they should see women, what consent really looks like. And so there's just a lot to really unpack there. But going back to that social media piece, Andy Crouch just notes that no one flourishes until they have persons who know them and reflect back to them who they are. I love that. Tanei commenting on the intergenerational connections of women being in real relationships where we are seen. And what's difficult is social media taps into that human need to be recognized, but it gives us this false sense of control over how others see us. And so we don't really experience what we truly need, which is to be seen and known in our fallibility and our weakness, to be loved and cared for, watched over that way. And so we have just really got to be intentional about preserving face-to-face human relationships that are difficult and disappointing that we navigate, and not this escape world where we can escape into other, whether it's pornography or social media or some other form that takes us away from real, genuine human relationships that are so essential for our development. So I think unpacking that social media side and the sexuality side as well, and the mental health issue, I think girls today live at a time, as adolescents, you're always trying on identities, right? Am I smart? Am I athletic? What am I? Am I beautiful? And they're being offered, with that powerful force of social media kind of propelling this, they're being offered all of these different identities, many of which separate them from their embodiment as a woman, right? So you're just the variety of identities that they might try on, and how complex and confusing that is during a period in their lives when they are just desperately in need of developing a solidified sense of self. So I think that mental health, the identity piece, sexuality, and social media are just working together in a really challenging way to compromise healthy development.
Thank you for that. And that made me think about a study I read a couple of years ago in terms of how in my age, and even younger than me, we often as young women or girls used to journal. We used to have diaries and journal, and that has gone away because people post, and journals were for us to help
They're
us
therapeutic.
wrestle through our own things. And now the journaling has gone online, but that's not for us. It's for other people. Anyway, it was an interesting piece that there's not this reflective opportunity for this quiet reflection. Anyway, it reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Christy, were you going to jump in and say something?
You know, as I listened to all of Janet's comments, I've read some of those similar studies, and the fact, you know, we're talking, Dr. Madsen, a lot about how can we help the girls.
Yeah.
We can't do this one sex-sided.
True.
We've got to step up and also educate boys, because the messaging being received in that pornography vein is the exact opposite of what will preserve young women. You know, we tell boys no means no, but pornography says no doesn't mean no, right? And so as we see the sexual violence going up, and we see, as Jeanette was talking about, the disconnect, you know, in mental health, we have a terminology of disassociation, which is a big disruption of emotional stability. But our climate by itself is disassociating girls. So if something negative happens, instead of allowing them to process, they disassociate, right? And so it's almost as though they're not true to themselves, which we have to return to. And that's part of the journaling you were talking about, that ability to self-actualize, to self-process, to set with self, to be able to realize there's difficult moments and you can reason through. We are shackling our young people from that ability of resiliency. Our society, for some reason, has shifted that process of resiliency that's created in that difficult adolescent time period. And we've got to help them get back to that. But I think we have to realize, as we have this conversation, if we're going to allow young women to develop and become the amazing human beings they are, we also have to have young men understand what this society is teaching them in regards of the objectification of women is wrong.
That was such
Can I
an
add to that? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure, Gina, go ahead.
I want to, for about a decade, I worked as a therapist for young men, mainly, who had offended sexually. And so we talked about all of this and how do we help them be part of the solution? And we have a commenter here who's saying, you know, boys are, you know, they're also at risk. We need to help them with women, but we need to help them with themselves too, which I completely agree with. And we do need to make sure that they're so just to build on what Dr. Kane said, we do need to have, we do need to work with our boys, right? We need to work with our boys. And one way that I think we can do this is teaching consent. Now that was a hot topic in our legislature a couple of years ago, but we shouldn't be teaching consent. I think there was a misunderstanding. We're teaching consent that they can just go have sex with whoever they want. No, we're just teaching what is healthy sexuality. What is consent? How do you consent to I think that would go a long ways. And another thing that I'm very passionate about is having the males, and I think I as a female should model good female roles for the boys. I don't have any sons, but I should model healthy female roles for boys. Men should also be modeling what they want their daughters or their nieces or their whomever to how they want their significant others eventually in their lives. I've had my poor husband is not from the mental health field. And so we're getting ready to get to talk we talk all the time about sex, and not sex specifically, but we talk about, it's not like this opaque, it's like, we talk about it, right? But we're going to have to talk about the changes in your body. And I said, you need to be there. You need to be, and he kind of looked at me like deer in the headlights. I'm like, no, you need to be there. She needs to know that you are not, that this is not embarrassing. I was like, well, what if it is embarrassing? And I'm like, then we need to get past that, right? And then we're also talking about, he tickles her and she says no, then we have conversations about no means no. And I say to him, you're modeling for her what she's going to accept from men and young men in her life. And so if you keep tickling her, she's going to expect that that's what love looks like. And so I think that our men need to model, and I have to be completely upfront here, we need to, as women, model too, not just for the girls, but for the boys. But since we're talking about girls here, we need to have our men modeling, and we need to be teaching them consent.
Thank you so much. I want to shift over. There's so many topics we could go to, but I want to hit some of the questions in the queue. There's lots going on, I can see. And so Tanei, I want to come over to you. And so there was one in the Q&A. We've got chat going and Q&A, but one of them talked about, which I think is really important, how can we maneuver from the disconnect from even just mothers and daughters? Any insights on that? And even at the age that you do your summit, that 8 to 12, usually they're still talking to their moms about that age, but it can shift.
Yeah. First thing I'll say is I'm the mother of a 14-year-old and 11-year-old daughters. And if you have any advice, please send it my way, because I think that we have to do, like, I feel like as a mother, I have to do whatever it takes. So that means, guys, that I am watching YouTube crafting tutorials, nail painting tutorials, because that's what they care about. I'm watching anime. I don't care about anime, but they do. So that's what I'm doing, is trying to connect with them in any way that I can. Any entry they give me, I'm taking it. If it means we're shopping, if it means I don't care what it is. And then to what Gina said earlier, I am not under any illusion that my daughters should only look to me as a woman. I cannot be their everything. I can barely be my own part, right? Like, I can only kind of take care of myself. I rely so much on my community, my siblings, my good friends. I farm my daughters out to other women because they need to see, just like Gina said, and I think this for boys and men too, they need to see examples of what it looks like to be a woman. And I think it's very clear here, I'm the only one with a non-doctor title. I think that's fine. But also, what would it be like if you knew somebody who was a doctor? Go talk to them. What if you want to be an environmental engineer? Go talk to that person. They want to help you, and they have great stories. And frankly, one of my daughters and I were just not alike. So she needs to see other people.
And when I was doing research, this was like 12 years ago, or even more, 14 years ago, on the college decision. I don't know if any of you were paying attention. Christy, you've been following for a long time. We did all of the study on the college decision and the impacts. What just was so clear to me at how just even small moments of a neighbor, of a church leader, of an aunt, and so I changed how I did things. I stepped forward to say to a friend of my daughter's or anybody, to just say, what are you thinking of going? Where are you thinking of going to college? Or are you thinking, I changed. And I think that's what you're saying, Tanei.
And Susan, you've always talked about the tap, right? Women need to be tapped about 7 times before they'll start to think, it really is me. It really is me who should step into this role. And what if we just started tapping earlier and saying, hey, my daughter's breakdance. Hey, that was really brave of you to get out there, and just have other people other than their parents cheering for them.
Yeah, it looks like some other of you are dying to get in, but can you look? I have not been able to get on the chat. Christy, have you looked at the chat? Are there some really
There's a good question. Dr. Madsen, I think there's a question to be addressed. It says that they feel like a lot of this discussion about is a majority of the Utah culture. Girls, could we address this towards minorities within the culture and immigrants within the culture, which I think is an appropriate question or statement.
I'd be happy to address that. I saw that. I am the daughter of an immigrant, and I'm not the same color as the people I was raised. I was raised a lot here in Provo. And I ran into some cultural things, but I think my bottom line for this is my advice to you would be the same when you're working with these. So we need to have it modeled. We need the dads to model it. We need to be having these open conversations. The shift comes, in my opinion, when we're talking about immigrants and people who are of not the dominant culture, is the way that you do that, the way that you approach that. I know in my culture, mental health has not traditionally been something that we talk about. And so I kind of have to approach it sideways, and we need people to approach it who are from that community. We need bridge people. I don't know if that's a good term, but we need people who are from those communities, who understand the topics and understand the issues and also understand the culture. Like, I can't go into a refugee family and successfully help them, or maybe not as successfully as someone who maybe has those experiences but understands it. So we need to find key people. We need to find key people from within their communities that understand these things, and then have them do a lot of the bridging. Because I think the principles are pretty much going to be the same. It's the way we present it, and we need to be able to present these things in a culturally appropriate and thoughtful way. But I appreciate it. I saw that question. I appreciated it.
And I want to jump in, because we did at the Utah Women in Leadership Project in the last year and a half, we did a number of reports where we gathered focus groups of women, like 2 of them for Asian women, 2 of them for Hispanic, and 2 for Black and Native American, and various things. And in every single one of those gatherings, like 20, 30 people from those particular census categories, mental health came up. And what was really, I just hadn't thought of this. So as a white woman, I hadn't thought of this. But in every single one, the shortage of mental health professionals who were of their race were so important, because they just felt like it was hard, Gina, does that connect with? We need more, I guess I'm saying we need more everybody to step forward and get the education to be therapists, but we need women of color.
We do. And I get pushback because people think that I'm trying to put minorities above, or, cultural or ethnic minorities above others. And that's just not the case. There's something about talking to someone who's had a similar life experience. And there's something about talking to someone who looks like you, right? That's one of my big things with the school board, is I try to get, especially in front of students, and say, I look like you, and you can do this. We don't want to take over the world necessarily, but you can do this, and we need to hear your voice. So it is very important, and there is a lack of that, I think, of therapists.
Thank you. Tanei.
Since 2017, when I started Provo Girls Summit, I have a good friend who started Aya Rises for Hispanic youth. Girls, and they are very active and very wonderful. There is also in 2017 in Salt Lake City, the Curly Me organization. That nonprofit is doing wonderful things, and it's aimed specifically towards Black young women and girls. And it is to watch. It's so funny that all of us came in 2017. I don't know what it was, but we all started and we all just decided to go for it. So these groups do exist. And also, I have to say, since we're talking about the marginalized groups, we also haven't talked much about LGBTQ, but those statistics are different. And if you look through the study yourself, you can see where they point that out, and they talk about that. So
I think you should type those resources in the chat.
Happy to. Yep, will do.
And Jeanette, I was going to go to you and see if you'd seen anything in the chat. I'm not keeping up. Sometimes I keep up, but I'm not keeping up with that discussion. Anything that you think is particularly important that you'd like to jump on?
I haven't been following well enough.
Oh.
I've been so, but I was thinking, as they were talking about the importance of cultural understanding, it's been interesting to live at a time when the goodness and trueness of femaleness feels like it's just been smattered. And I think that around maleness as well, manhood too, but across cultures, what we bear in common as women needs to be so valued and highlighted. I think in our efforts sometime for equality, which has been so essential, we've abandoned the biological reality of our womanhood, of our femaleness, of its goodness, and juxtapose that in a culture that sexualizes women, that ubiquitously, where women are mistreated in this developmental process, then you just have women wanting to escape the reality of their femaleness. That's really painful. And so cross-culturally, we share so much as women that makes us unique from men, and that's central to the flourishing of human beings and society, and to really find a way to see that power within us as women that's distinct. So I've loved so much, Susan, your work in this effort for equality that's so important, while not abandoning distinction. And it seems like we as a culture, it's like we cannot figure that out. In order to get equal, we abandon any difference. And when we do it, we disempower ourselves as women. We do not grab hold of the unique strength that we have. So our girls have got to grow up valuing womanhood,
Yes.
valuing femaleness, treasuring that. And it can't happen in a culture where that femaleness is so misused, right? But that's saying this is not what makes us female, is this misuse. That's the distortion, right, that we need to attack culturally. And I think that's cross-culturally. Women are desperate in need of valuing our femaleness as women.
That is such a great point. And it is, we often, when we use that word equality, and I do this differently, but we often think of maybe more of the liberal feminist, where we're lifting girls and women and bringing boys and men down. But that's not what we're talking about, right? We need healthy boys and men. We need healthy girls and women. This conversation and the work that I do, and many of you are just focused around girls and women, but I encourage everyone to be doing work on boys and men. Thank you for those insights. I do want to shift, and we have already talked about this before. It's come up with all of you, but if you have any, I just want to read a couple of the statistics in that second main area we were going to talk about, and that's sexual violence. Of course, we have talked about that already. Specifically in the CDC report, there were two metrics that they talked about. The first one, almost 1 in 5 teen girls experienced sexual violence in the past year, which was a significant increase from 2017. That was the first one. So 1 in 5 teen girls. I mean, I just want the listeners to think about that. And then 2, more than 1 in 10 teen girls reported that they have ever been forced to have sex.
Yeah.
And so I know like I said, I know we've talked about this already, but I wanted to just bring up those statistics for our listeners, and any other comments maybe from a couple of you on those issues, in addition to what's been talked about.
You know, I guess I'm going to go back to our culture in a sense here in Utah, and in addressing those statistics that's already been mentioned, but I think it's important to drive it home. We've spent a culture teaching a concept of morality, but not a culture of a concept of healthy sexuality. And there's a big difference. And we have to become a culture that teaches healthy sexuality, because in teaching that, we perpetuate morality, but we also support the identity of men and women in a positive way. And the more we objectify women, I mean, the objectification of women has been interesting. We've gone from the time period where she was the fragile sex symbol to now she's the sex symbol carrying the guns and shooting everybody, right? In the movie dynamics that we're playing with, but we're still sexualizing her. And in that sexualization is that impression that a sexualized woman is meant to be used or taken advantage of, right? And so as we teach girls assertiveness, and we teach healthy sexuality on both sides of the channel, men and women, boys and girls, we can help change this. But right now, if you look at the communication, like when I spoke at the resource conference, the officers who serve in schools said the number one issue is sexting and sexual exploitive information and pictures that is shared. And that by the time young people get together on a date, it's already been so sexualized in their conversation that the boys expect the girl will perform. And that's so sad. And so their biggest concern is the sexualization in the social media texting and images that disrupts any normal pathway of learning to develop a dating process to respect each other. Instead, they're just getting together and the boy expects a hookup, or maybe even the girl does sometime. And so there's a lot of things that we have to change in teaching healthy sexuality.
And that's going to take, I'm just like thinking, that's going to take so many. And in my field of organization development, we call them interventions, right? Whether it's training, whether it's, I mean, whatever it might be. But we're talking about widespread. I mean, to even combat any of the social media, that's widespread. How do we roll this out to protect our kids, right?
Well, Susan, so many times it's so funny, and the other panelists may see this. but I have parents in my office who are scared to death to regulate or control the cell phone or social media of their kids. And that's the wrong perspective. We have to step in and regulate and help our kids in that social media world. We handed the phones out like candy, having no idea of the negative side effects that would happen. And now we're afraid to rein it back in. We're afraid our kids will feel isolated, or that FOMO word, right? Or all those things. But if we don't rein in and help them monitor, we're never going to get ahead of it. So parents have to be the ones that start with all that education from, I mean, I can't believe the 5-year-olds are running around with smartphones, but they are, right? And so it's got to be with the parents deciding that social media doesn't rule the home.
Yeah.
Can I add, sorry.
You go ahead, Gina.
Literacy, right? Digital literacy, media literacy, sex literacy, like there's so much information. Those phones have so much information. If we can teach our kids, not just what our values are, but how do they see, like, how do they interpret what they're seeing? Like they need to have skills independent of us. They need all these literacy skills because there's so much information that's coming at them.
I was just going to add, Susan, so powerful. We're experiencing this profound epidemic of loneliness. Young adult, it's not just adolescent mental health that's dropped so much, but young adult mental health, right? And so it's interesting, just recent research showed that it used to be this U curve where young adults had high well-being, kind of flourishing. Then it would drop across, right, those early years of marriage and parenting, and then rise again. Just in the last, since January, that's totally flattened out. That left side of the curve with young adult well-being has just flattened out. And when we look at factors, all of this is playing a role, but there is profound loneliness and alienation. And it's interesting just thinking about relational strength and marital quality and all of those things. It has to be grounded in emotional intimacy, in friendship, the capacity to share in healthy ways one's full self in relationship to others. And then that sexual piece is at the top, right? It's reserved for spaces where one can be fully seen, known in a trusting relationship and share one's whole body in safety. But we flipped that pyramid upside down, where we've got all these people, right, trying to build relational strength, or at least looking for some kind of affirmation relationally in that sexual space that's designed to be the expression of oneness, not the foundation of oneness. And it's just toppling over. So you're destroying, in a sense, this hunger for intimacy is being sabotaged by the way we treat sexuality, by alcohol being such a powerful mediator right there in relationships, masking the sense of boundary, the sense of self, prohibiting the ability for consent to even be experienced or understood. And we're trying to build the capacity for relationships. It's no wonder there is an epidemic of loneliness, because our whole understanding of how relationships are built and maintained is flipped upside down with that tearing apart of sex from marriage and children. Right, we've broken it outside of the bounds where it is designed to be an expression of connection, as opposed to a way of using other people in this attempt to get a sense of connection.
Wow, I'm learning so much from all of you. Thank you so much. You mentioned as well the alcohol, and one of the things that this report also said was that girls, and we don't have the Utah data on that piece yet, but that girls in the United States are now consuming more alcohol, these teen girls, than teen boys. And that's a flip as well. I don't know if any of you have any comments or insights on that.
I think it's important to remember that 99% of the time, any type of substance use is an attempt to self-medicate. It is an attempt to deal with a mental health issue. So I wasn't surprised at all, because as we look at the rates of depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, then of course substance abuse would play right in hand with that, because they're trying to self-medicate. They're trying to resolve the feelings that they have. And unfortunately, we don't have enough mental health professionals, enough mental health training. And so our young people will return to what's easiest to access, sometimes based on peer pressure, but also based on a need to escape.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Tanei, we haven't given it over to you for a little bit, but any thoughts about any of this, but also, going to solutions. We have to keep pushing ourselves towards that hope. Anything come to mind that you would like to share?
Well, if we go back a bit, we've talked about a number of things. So, but your last big kind of topic for me, it was the sexual violence. And the sexual violence just really, Utah has historically been even worse off than the nation in sexual violence. And what makes me so nervous about that is, well, here are some questions I have. Do parents and adults who are entrusted with information about, okay, so if my kid were to tell me I was raped, I experienced sexual violence. If I were told that, do I know what to do? Do the trusted adults in our environment know what to do with that information? And I'd say the same thing with suicide, right? When suicide comes up, do the adults know what to do? And to be honest, I'm not sure that we do.
No.
If we are told that, what are the next steps? And I think that is one thing that we need to be clear about. The other thing we need to be clear about is, what is sexual violence? I heard, one of the reasons I started Provo Girls Summit is because I heard a Title IX coordinator from one of our local colleges talking about how many girls she's had in her office who didn't even realize that they were being preyed on sexually because they weren't sure, they weren't fully educated about what sex is, right?
Yeah.
And folks, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We have to do better about educating our boys and girls about sex in general. We have to, so that they what body parts, so that they can describe what happened to them, so that they can just general safety, all of this. And not to mention what Christy already, I'm sorry, I don't remember your last name, Christy.
That's good.
What Dr. Christy already said. And now I've lost my full train of thought because I just pulled out of it. But there are just layers of this, right? We talk about the entire social structure of sexualizing human bodies when our bodies are so functional, right? And a part of them is sexual.
Yeah.
But that's not everything that my body is. So I think that this education really is, as you said, it's an overhaul of an entire society base. It is not just we're not going to solve it right now, but I feel encouraged knowing that this many people are interested in solutions, right? That this many people at least are hoping for improvement in this arena, because I think it's scary. I have ideas of hosting, like bringing in doctors for girls ages 8 to 12 with my Provo Girls Summit and running just health education things. I know schools are limited, but I'm very nervous about that. You put yourself out there, and I could get ostracized really quickly from a lot of situations. It's a huge risk. So Dr. Madsen, we'll be talking, and I'll need your help because you're going to have to hold my hand through this. It's really scary to me.
I'm feeling very inspired to go in a new direction not a new direction, a forward direction called A Bolder Way Forward, where we're bringing on every topic, including health, including gender pay gap, and including sexual assault, is to start really bringing all of the resources together and all of the players, all the people doing things, so we can identify what's out there, have better ways for parents to find that, everybody to find that, but also figure out where are those gaps. And so, if you search, for those listening, a bolderwayforward.org, it'll go to our page. We haven't really launched it, but it's going to be powerful. And I think that would be helpful for people to know what's out there. Parents need resources. I really appreciate your comment about overhaul. That was the word, overhaul.
I just see one of the comments that I think only we can see. And this is a parent who says he did not know what he was supposed to do when his daughter experienced sexual assault. So I'm clearly it's necessary.
So for
Just
those
so that-
listening, yeah, we just had an event a month or two ago from Supriya. So and Supriya is such an amazing resource in the state of Utah with parent resources on talking about consent, on all of those things. So make sure, you know, if you're listening in, there's some resources out there, and there's much more than that as well.
Susan, I was
Yeah.
going to add, we've just spent a year in my company and just published our second revision of a mental health cognitive resiliency manual. And it's for everyone. So if parents want to know what's depression look like and how do I help my kids with depression or anxiety, people can go to our website. We just released our second version of that mental health manual as a resource.
I would love to have each of you, and Gina, I think I'm going to start with you. Just give us, you know, a few thoughts as we what final advice do you have for parents or other kinds of influencers, you know, teachers or whatever, on just a few tips, I guess. What final advice would you have for all of us?
Susan, can I just interrupt for one little second?
Oh,
This is
sure.
actually for Gina, but it seems like one of the challenges with addressing just a quick comment about all of the sexual assault, the sexual abuse, just how pervasive it is, and I've got sisters working intensely on this effort, but that we've got to pull this out of the silence, right? We've got to break out of the silence. The challenge is that perpetrators, and Gina, so interesting that you worked with perpetrators, it sounds like young men, that they are so vilified, so often so vilified culturally, and that it is very difficult to break out of the silence unless we address that dimension of it. So this importance of seeing how devastating it is, how wrong it is, how serious it is, and also helping perpetrators. So there can be more openness about it. So Gina, do you have a second just to comment on that? Because we never talk about that. And
yes, and I will fold it into my what Dr. Madsen has asked for, which is we need to take the shame and the guilt out of having this, out of sex in general, out of talking about mental health, right? But we also tend to put people in boxes, right? We have the perpetrators and we should put them away at the point of the mountain and then we should never see them again, or we should put them all to death. And that really does, like Jeanette was saying, like, nobody wants to come out. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that they're struggling with these thoughts. And as long as we have this pervasive shame surrounding sex, not just sex, but making mistakes around, and as long as we're talking, we talk about the national figures who have done stupid, not just stupid, very violent or whatever things, even when we couch those in terms of there is no coming back from that, and that person needs to be sent to Siberia. We don't want to send them to Siberia either, right? We don't want to hurt the Siberians. But when we want to get rid of them and have them be out of our consciousness, then our kids, be they boys, be they girls, men, women, they are not going to come out and talk about these things. And so really what we need to do, and my advice, I have people ask me all the time, you worked with kids who offended sexually, what do I need to do to protect my child from being offended? My number one piece of advice is you need to be so open, and your communication with your kid needs to be so good, because you can't. The only way to protect your kid is to lock them in the basement, and then that will cause a whole nother set of issues. And so really what you need to do is you need to be so open that when things like this start to happen, or they have happened, your child will come to you and tell you so you can stop it, right? So you can help them stop it. And part of that is what Jeanette just said, which is we need to get rid of the shame that is attached to this, and the labels that we attach to them that also have shame attached to them. We need to be careful and we need to have boundaries, but I think all of the shame that we attach to all of this is a big problem. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That was an awesome, I didn't know what I was going to say, but that was great.
Thank you. Tanei, what's your final advice?
I feel like these girls really feel so intensely, right? This is the whole thing about being a teenager, is when you feel sadness, you feel it to the extreme. And when you feel joy, you feel it to the extreme. And I just, I love that about this age group, that's where they are. And I just hope that we can overall, you know, as as the adults who are holding their hand and leading them, that we can recognize that and honor them where they are. And like Gina said, just take away the shame from any of those extreme feelings and really be the people who see them, like Jenet said earlier, that we can see them and know them and appreciate them right where they are. And then I think as we can do more of that, then as adults, we can work out the things that we need so that they can have the scaffolding to get into adulthood in a more healthy way.
Thank you. And we need to be healthy ourselves as adults, as grandparents.
100%. We have to model it. It's not just telling them you should journal.
Yeah.
If we think they should journal, we should probably be doing it.
Jeanette.
Thank you. Just what a treat to be part of this, to have this conversation makes me feel hope. Just two quick thoughts, Susan. I think a rekindling, a rejuvenation of the value of womanhood, of femininity, of what it means in its truest form, that you have worked so hard, right? Women in their fullest selves, so that our girls feel the privilege that it is to be a girl and a woman. And then the second piece is addressing the need for human connection. We are not isolated, autonomous individuals. That is not what human beings are meant for. We're meant to be in deeply bonded, deeply known, deeply seen relationships. And it's not an easy thing. And it requires developing and bringing our best and fullest to those relationships where we experience what we're really designed to, which is deep connection. And that means addressing the what is true about being a human being, what is true about being a woman, what is true about being a human being, and strengthening our orientation around that. Boundaries on social media, that's part of that. I think it's doing all we can to intentionally facilitate strong relational connections and capacities as a woman, as a girl.
Thank you so much. And Christy, thanks again, Christy, for helping me, working with me to put this panel together. But I'll give you the last word.
Everybody has been so phenomenal. I don't think I could take notes fast enough. Labels. We have become a society that labels, and we have to stop labeling. And we have to help our young people realize how amazing they are. I teach a class at a university, and I ask my students if they thought their generation was less resilient or more resilient than the generations of the past. Because when I ask that of older audiences, they always say less.
Oh.
And it was interesting when the young people said, Dr. Kane, you're asking the wrong question. And I go, what do you mean? And they said, it's not that we're less or more, it's that we want answers. We don't want to put it in the closet, and we don't want to pretend anymore that there's not a problem. We want practical solutions that can be applied in our lives. And so we need to talk openly, frankly, honestly, and supportive to these young people and take away labels. Let them be themselves and let them know how wonderful they are with human connection. I'm the one that started, I did that research on 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds, right? Let's go back to face-to-face, eye-to-eye, knee-to-knee, hand-to-hand, holding our young people and just letting them know that they're wonderful and amazing, and that they have a safe place to fall and a safe place to talk.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank each of our panelists and all of you for joining us today. Also, our sponsors, again, the Utah Education Network, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and USU Extension for making this event possible. And so again, abolderwayforward.org, you can find out more about that, and just a little bit more about that. So I wasn't planning on this, but I'm going to do it for those of you that are interested anyway. And so as I've been doing research for decades now on these things, and especially in the state of Utah, I've taken and looked at trajectories. And we're just so slow in moving the needle. And at our current trajectory, and we in Utah have high rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, gender-based discrimination, and many other things, low levels of women in leadership. And if we keep going at the rate we're going, it's going to be 2, 3, 4 decades to make any notable progress. And to me, that's not acceptable anymore. And so this bolder way forward is if we can bring us together and really work as a system instead of all the pieces and parts that we're doing, can we in 7 years do what would take, decades to do? And I think we don't have a choice. For my daughter, for my granddaughter, for the little twins that are in my daughter's belly, one of them's a girl, to do better and figure out how to do better. So thanks again for joining us. Have a wonderful day.